Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay at the back? You're good? Okay. As of last week, I was not on the agenda for this event. I had registered and was going to be out there in the audience, but was invited late last week by Jeff to participate, and I'm very grateful for that invitation. I am someone, as are most of you, who has a great passion for rural places and for helping shape their futures in a positive way. And so what I'd like to talk to you about is a type of rural community that we haven't touched upon as much today so far, but one that I think we need to keep in mind. And that's the fact that for many rural places, be it in Ontario or anywhere else in Canada, the more peripheral rural communities that don't have the opportunities to benefit from the proximity of a large city, they have an even greater challenge in many cases as far as what lies ahead in dealing with their community economic development future. For example, I grew up just outside of Burritts Rapids, Ontario, if you're familiar with it, right near Kemptville and Merrickville. That area has benefited from its proximity to Ottawa. Kemptville, where I went to high school, now when I did my driver's test back in the 80s, we had a four-way stop sign at the highways, and that was about it. Now there's Highway 416 going through, there's a Walmart, they're on their third Canadian Tire as they keep growing bigger, there's traffic lights and everything. But what about those places much more further away from the big cities? What do they do when they can't benefit from the growth of the commuter population or from those day trippers coming out as tourists and that sort of thing? And so with that in mind, that's sort of been where I've gone with a lot of my research as a rural geographer based at Brock in St. Catharines. In my previous life, before I entered academia, I did my master's, as Jeff said, in urban planning at Queen's, and I graduated in 1997. From there, I went up and took on the very challenging role, I was a bit out of my league, I must admit, as the general manager of a brand new Community Futures Development Corporation up in northern Manitoba, where we serve 25 communities over 4,000 square kilometers. So it was an incredibly large area, but also it woke me to the challenges facing these more peripheral and dispersed rural communities. So when I do my research, which I'm talking to you about today with 8 minutes to go already, I'm notorious for long preambles. Anyway, I've titled it something that really, as much as we as academics like to write in our journals and book chapters and so on, sometimes it's the non-academics who put it the most simply and can say as much as we take a whole journal article to say. And this is a quote from one of the economic development officers whom I interviewed in the town of Gravelburg, Saskatchewan, which has a population of 1,200 people and is very much a peripheral rural community in Canada. When we were talking, he and I, about rural economic development and how do we shape a positive outcome for rural communities such as Gravelburg, he said the bottom line is you've got to create a place where people want to be. And it makes perfect sense. Whether it's tourists wanting to be there as visitors, whether it's business owners wanting to work there as entrepreneurs, whether it's people wanting to live there as residents, as parents, as retirees, you've got to create a place where people want to be. So Gravelburg, with its 1,200 people, you can see it probably not from the back, but again, you'll get the slides online later, is about 2 hours southwest of Regina, and it's known primarily as a French Canadian community. Its historical roots go back to 1906 when a priest from Quebec wanted to create a French Roman Catholic colony on the prairies. So to this day, 45% or so of the 1,200 residents of Gravelburg have French as their mother tongue. So it's very much a bilingual community. The street signs are in French and English, as the stop sign says stop and arrête, that sort of thing. But it's also served an important role over the years as a regional sort of agricultural service center. But over the years, through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, as more and more services were centralized, as Norm just spoke about, as the railway companies began to consolidate their operations, the grain elevators were being closed and torn down, Gravelburg's leaders realized that something really needed to be done. And so by the mid-1990s, they decided to take a much more proactive and strategic approach to trying to revitalize the community, which many had seen, were feeling had a very sort of bleak future ahead of it if nothing was done. So I'm just very, very quickly going to show you a few pictures of some of the things they did. I unfortunately just don't have time to get into all of the detail, but I can certainly talk to you more about it afterwards, or if you email me or something of that sort. But anyway, in a nutshell, over the years since about 1997, when the very proactive community development-minded council was elected into office in the community, the first thing they did was in 1998, they hired the town's first ever economic development officer. The town never had such a position before. They never really had much in the way of active sort of development work going on. There was the ad hoc committee here and there perhaps, but that was about it. Anyway, that person was me. After being at the CFDC for about a year and a half, I moved down to Gravelburg and embarked with them on this journey, and it's resulted in this relationship that I have with them up to this day. So anyway, over the years, they've done things like a streetscaping and downtown revitalization project. They've put interlocking brick on the sidewalks. They put these metallic banners that were all designed by local craftspeople, each of which was paid for by a local merchant. A local vacant lot that was sort of where the litter blew with the wind was converted into a beautiful little park, and all of the artwork that you see there in the fountain and such was created by local artisans. The Gaiety Theatre, which had gone into tax arrears and was taken over by the town, was converted into a community arts center that is used for everything from your typical sort of Hollywood movie showings on Friday and Saturday night through to festivals, concerts, and other sort of events like book readings and that sort of thing. An unsightly house right next to the town hall that was basically a dilapidated, boarded up building was actually purchased by a local resident and donated to the town because she hated it so much. She paid about $3,000 for it, and she said, "Here, I want you guys to have this on the condition that you tear it down, and then you let our beautification committee put a park in its place." And this is what we have in lieu of the rundown house. Gravelburg has also taken the initiative to organize many, many festivals and events. If you go to Gravelburg's website and you look at their calendar of events, there's virtually something going on almost quite literally every weekend, and every day of the week the calendar is replete with different activities and concerts and so these sorts of things. This is the Southern Saskatchewan Summer Solstice Festival, which is held in Gravelburg every year, the weekend closest to the first day of summer. What else is very interesting is that Gravelburg, Norm talked about creating a welcoming community for immigrants and for migrants more generally, for people of different ethnicities. Gravelburg, over the course of the time that I'm talking about, since the late 90s, really has earned a reputation as being one of those places where you want to be because of initiatives like the ones I've mentioned. And the most interesting point, and this is something that really gets people's attention, is that between 2006 and 2008 alone, 250 people moved to Gravelburg. And I know it's true because I have the list of names. Because in a small enough town, you can do that. But anyway, and I even can tell you whose house they bought and everything else. But what the town did was they had a welcome reception for a couple of different years. They invited all of the newcomers to the community to come and join them at the cultural center in the community, and they were welcomed by the mayor. There was music, entertainment, a sort of wine and cheese sort of event, and treats for the kids, that sort of thing. And it made for a very welcoming environment that was meant to further integrate those newcomers into the community. They also celebrate the diversity of the community by having what's called an International Food Festival every year as part of it's the first day of the Summer Solstice Festival, where every culture or ethnicity represented in Gravelburg's population is invited to participate. They each set up booths which exhibit and they sell food from their culture, a couple of different dishes that are well known, and every year also a certain group gets sort of highlighted in terms of things like their dance, their music, and that sort of thing. And it's grown from being held in the cultural center that holds 150 people to the curling rink, which held 300, and as you can see here in the hockey rink, minus the ice, it held about 600 people, and there were still people flooding outside and eating their food in the parking lot because it was so full. So these are the types of events that really make a community a place where people want to be. And it has led to, people say, well, what about the economic development and the jobs and the money? Yes, and as Mark Roseland said, we can't think about only the economics, but certainly it matters. People need jobs, people need incomes to pay the bills and keep the services going and so on. Well, the co-op grocery store, which was at risk of closure, or at least being amalgamated with the co-op at the town down the road, instead, over a stretch of a few years, the position of the town, the business improved so much that they ended up spending $800,000 gutting the grocery store and rebuilding, basically from the inside out, an entirely new state-of-the-art grocery store. Can I have about 30 more seconds? Thanks. The province of Saskatchewan chipped in as well. And this was something that a lot of people thought, well, a liquor store. This is the brand new liquor store that was built in Gravelburg in the late 2000, about 2007, I believe. And people think, well, big deal, the government's building a liquor store. Well, they used to have a very old, sort of ratty liquor store in a brick building with a leaky roof. And with Gravelburg's French population, French wines were really big sellers, but they couldn't carry all the French wines that people wanted because they didn't have room. And so when the government, got wind of Gravelburg's economic revitalization strategy, they, in the end, agreed to all of our pleas and letters that we had sent over the years. I was one of the first ones to write the letters, and they kept going. And they spent $1 million on this building on Main Street. And look at, even the architecture was somewhat more significant than your standard brick liquor store building. Some of the vacant buildings in town, like what used to be a red and white grocery store, was bought by an out-of-towner who used to be a local resident. He bought this building and opened a gift shop that is now a destination for tourists from throughout southern Saskatchewan. Places like Moose Jaw and Swift Current, people drive down to Styles to shop at this particular facility, but they also sell a lot of goods for the local residents as well. And then now we have entrepreneurs starting their own businesses like Café Paris, which is a beautiful cafe. It's started by a woman who immigrated to Gravelburg from Holland in the 1970s. She went through a leadership training course that was part of the community's development efforts, and they recruited a whole bunch of residents of the community to do the leadership training, and those are among the people now who are the most active leaders and volunteers in the community. And it also gave her the confidence. She's the one who admits this. She said, I never would have done this 20 years ago, but after going through the leadership training and these sorts of things, I had the competence and the confidence to go ahead and do this. Unfortunately, I'm very much out of time, and I'm nowhere near telling you as much as everything I would have liked. But what was good, though, is that when Norm did his slide with all of those components of community development, that's essentially what I was going to say. So he sort of stole my thunder. You'll see the slides later, but it is all about sort of, place-based development, recognizing your local assets, taking advantage of the community's strengths, and especially, most importantly, taking advantage of and capitalizing on that social capital. Because in Gravelburg, if it wasn't for the volunteer community, very, very little of this would have happened. They had an EDO since 1997 or 1998, but he or she has been a facilitator, and most of the work's been done by volunteers through their own sort of blood, sweat, and tears. Anyway, thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed that little trip to Saskatchewan.